126.9%. That's how much greater calf muscle growth was in one study when only part of the movement, but specifically in a deep muscle stretch, was performed compared to the full movement. It really makes you wonder if what many of us have been doing in the gym for years, always performing every exercise through the full range, might not always be optimal, especially when it comes to building muscle.
That figure is indeed remarkable and draws attention to a detail in strength training that's often discussed, the range of motion, or ROM for short. Traditionally, full ROM means that a joint is moved through its maximum extension to its maximum flexion during an exercise. For a squat, for example, that would be going as deep as possible until your glutes almost touch the ground. In contrast, there are partial repetitions, also called partials, where the movement is intentionally performed in a smaller segment of this full radius, whether at the beginning, in the middle, or at the end of the possible movement.
Exactly. And if you think back, there have always been different training philosophies. You remember the bodybuilders of the golden era like Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was known for extremely high training volume, meaning many exercises and sets per muscle group, sometimes up to 30 sets. In stark contrast were pioneers like Arthur Jones in the 70s with his high-intensity training, or HIIT for short, or later Mike Menser and the successful bodybuilder Dorian Yates, who achieved impressive results with very few but extremely intense sets, often just a single set per exercise to momentary muscular failure. So naturally, the question arises as to which of these approaches is most effective, also concerning the range of motion.
These historical developments show that the search for the optimal training stimulus is diverse. However, the scientific examination of range of motion has yielded important insights in recent years. A systematic review and meta-analysis, which is a kind of summary and statistical evaluation of many individual studies on a topic, by Pallarez and colleagues from 2021, which included 16 studies, concluded that, on average, training with a full range of motion, full ROM, led to significantly greater adaptations in muscle strength and particularly in muscle hypertrophy, meaning muscle growth, of the lower extremities compared to partial training.
That sounds like a clear confirmation of the classic recommendation, full movement for full success. So is it better to move the weight all the way down and all the way up to be on the safe side? But that study mentioned at the beginning with the enormous calf muscle growth from partial reps performed specifically in the stretched position doesn't quite fit into that picture.
That is a crucial point that illustrates the complexity of the topic. A newer and even more comprehensive meta-analysis by Wolf and colleagues in 2023, which considered 24 studies, paints a somewhat more nuanced picture. In the overall model across all outcomes studied, the difference between moving a joint through its full range of motion and performing only a portion of that range was rather small. However, it becomes really interesting when you look more closely at which part of the movement the partial repetitions are performed in. Research increasingly suggests that repetitions performed only in the long muscle length, that is, in the position where the muscle is significantly stretched, could be particularly beneficial for muscle growth, possibly even more advantageous than moving through the full range of motion or performing repetitions in the shortened or contracted position of the muscle.
Long muscle lengths. That makes intuitive sense because you often feel a particularly intense tension in the muscle in the stretched position. For which exercises would this be particularly relevant? I can think of exercises where the end contraction, the point where the muscle is maximally shortened, sometimes doesn't feel that difficult, or the main stimulus lies elsewhere. For example, in calf raises right at the top, or in some rowing exercises when the dumbbell is already very close to the body.
Those are excellent examples. We also refer to these as shortened position challenged exercises, meaning exercises that present their greatest challenge in the shortened muscle position. Studies, for example, on the calf muscles, but also on the quadriceps muscles of the thigh during knee extensions, have shown that partial repetitions performed in the initial or stretched part of the movement can lead to greater regional hypertrophy. Regional hypertrophy means that specific sections of a muscle, for instance the distal portions, the muscle regions further away from the body center, grow more.
The mechanisms behind this could be an increased activation of cellular growth signals through the combination of high mechanical tension and significant stretch, or better stimulation of those very distal muscle portions. That would mean one might have to completely rethink and redesign their training, no longer stubbornly performing every exercise through the full range of motion, but instead specifically analyzing where the muscle is truly under the greatest productive tension and whether it makes sense to emphasize precisely this stretched range with partials. But what about strength development throughout the entire full range of motion? If I predominantly do only partial reps, won't I only get stronger in that specific part and neglect other areas?
That is the important principle of specificity in training. Generally, strength gains are greatest in the range of motion in which one trains. However, full range of motion training appears to transfer better to strength across partial ranges than the reverse. Therefore, it is not necessarily an either-or scenario. To maximize hypertrophy of specific muscles or muscle parts, partial repetitions performed at long muscle lengths can be a very effective supplement or even a primary strategy. For general strength development or for sport-specific movements that require a full range of motion, training with the full range of motion often remains the fundamental basis.
So, it could be a smart approach to combine both or to adapt the strategy depending on the training goal and specific exercise. Perhaps for exercises like calf raises, lateral raises for the shoulders, or certain rowing variations, one could consciously focus on the stretched phase and incorporate targeted partial reps there to optimize muscle growth. For complex compound exercises like squats or bench presses, where it's often also about strength throughout the entire range, one might then stick more to the full range of motion.
That's a very practice-oriented and well-thought-out approach. Science is providing us with increasingly finer puzzle pieces for optimal training. It's moving away from rigid, blanket recommendations towards a much more differentiated view that considers individual goals, the characteristics of the specific exercise, and even the biomechanical properties of the muscle being trained. The insight that mechanical tension, particularly in the stretched position of the muscle, is a potent stimulus for muscle growth truly opens up exciting new perspectives for individual training design.
In the end, it seems there isn't one universally valid answer to the question of optimal range of motion, but rather a spectrum of effective possibilities. However, the insight that muscle growth can potentially be further optimized by a targeted emphasis on the stretched phase is definitely a strong impetus to critically reflect on one's own training and design it more consciously.
Absolutely. It encourages one to observe and understand their own body and its specific reaction to different training stimuli even more closely. Science can, so to speak, provide us with the map showing various paths, but we often have to find and adapt the most suitable path for ourselves, considering these findings and our individual circumstances. So, a small but perhaps crucial thought for the next training session could be, where exactly in the movement do I feel the greatest stretch tension, and how can I target this stimulus more effectively for muscle growth?
We would like to thank you warmly for spending this episode with us. Your support and interest mean a great deal to us. We hope you were able to take away exciting insights and valuable food for thought. As always, we wish everyone a long, healthy, and happy life. Until next time.